Welcome back to Vuln Vibes, everyone. Today, we're going deep on a vulnerability that has everyone in security scrambling.
Yeah, this one's a real nail-biter.
CVE 2025-24813, affecting Apache Tomcat.
And the really scary part, it could lead to remote code execution.
Oh, and data leaks, too. Definitely not something to ignore.
Absolutely not, especially when you think about how many servers out there rely on Tomcat.
Exactly. So we're going to skip the Security 101 today since we know our listeners are already pros.
Right. You all know your MPAR-E, ATT, and CK from your kill chains.
We're going to really dig into the guts of this vulnerability and what it tells us about the bigger picture of security today.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's start by breaking down how this vulnerability actually works. What's the technical lowdown?
Okay, so picture this. You're uploading a big file to a server, right?
Huge file.
Right, so your browser might split it up into smaller chunks to send it faster.
Makes sense.
These are called partial PUT requests. Now, the problem is how Tomcat handles the names of these chunks. It uses the file names that you, the user, provide to create temporary files on its own system.
That sounds a little risky.
It is. It's a tiny detail that opens up a huge security hole.
So how does an attacker actually use this to, get into a system or steal data?
Well, there are a couple of ways. One is what we call information disclosure and corruption.
Meaning?
Let's say an attacker knows the names of some sensitive files that are being uploaded.
Okay.
If a few other conditions are met, like if the server allows rights to its default servlet, then the attacker might be able to actually view those sensitive files or even mess with them.
Yikes.
And that's just the first scenario.
You mentioned remote code execution, too. That sounds even worse.
Yeah, this is where things get really hairy. But for this to work, we need a few more things in place.
Like what?
First, those enabled rights have to be there. And the server needs to have partial PUT requests turned on.
Got it. What else?
The application also needs to be using something called file-based session persistence.
Session persistence.
Yeah, think of it like the server remembering who you are while you're browsing. It stores this information in files.
Okay.
If an attacker can manipulate those files, they can potentially hijack your entire session.
Oof.
And if the application is using a library that's vulnerable to what's called a deserialization attack,
Okay.
then game over, the attacker might be able to completely take over the server.
That's a lot of ifs, but still pretty scary stuff.
Definitely. And to make matters worse, this whole partial PUT functionality,
Yeah.
it's enabled by default in the vulnerable versions of Tomcat.
So it's like leaving the door wide open for attackers.
Pretty much.
So which versions are we talking about specifically so our listeners can check their systems?
Okay, the ones you need to worry about are Apache Tomcat 11.0.0-M1 up to 11.0.2, Apache Tomcat 10.1.0-0-0.2 to 9.0.98.
Okay, that's a lot of versions. So if you're running any of those, what should you do?
Update, like yesterday. The latest patch versions are much safer.
You heard it here first, folks. Update, update, update.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But beyond the immediate fix, I think this vulnerability really exposes some concerning trends in cybersecurity.
Absolutely. For one, it highlights just how complex software is these days, and how even tiny details can have massive security consequences.
It's not just about knowing the latest attack vectors anymore, right? It's about understanding that even the smallest coding oversight can be a major weak point.
Exactly. And this leads to another big trend: secure configuration. If those servers didn't need partial PUT functionality in the first place, they wouldn't be vulnerable.
It's about minimizing your attack surface as much as possible, shutting down any unnecessary features.
Exactly. Why leave a window open if you don't need it?
Makes sense.
And of course, this whole thing emphasizes the importance of security auditing and testing. If those checks had been more thorough, this vulnerability might have been caught before it even reached production systems.
You're right. It's not enough to just build software. It has to be built securely from the ground up.
100%.
Yeah. Well, this deep dive has certainly been a wake-up call for me. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing, and we all need to stay ahead of the game.
No doubt.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We're in a world where software is only getting more and more complex.
Truth.
So how can we as a community do a better job of weaving robust security practices into the entire development lifecycle? From start to finish, how can we make sure that vulnerabilities like this become rare exceptions, not the norm?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. Anyway, thanks for joining us on Vuln Vibes, everyone. Stay vigilant and stay safe out there.
Until next time.